Hello and welcome. I'm Amritanshu Rai and you're watching Law of the Land on Raj Sabha TV. Today we bring to you the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Bill 2014. To discuss the issue, I have with me Ms. Stuti Kakkar, former Secretary, Department of Disabilities Affairs, Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. She had started this separate department in the Ministry for Specially Abled People. And Aparna Bhatt, Advocate, Supreme Court. Now for the headlines. Insulting or intimidating a person with special abilities likely to be made a punishable offence. Reservations in jobs to be increased from 3 to 5% for specially abled persons. The Parliamentary Standing Committee recommends reservation policy to be extended to private entities. Insulting or intimidating a person with special abilities may be punishable with rigorous imprisonment. The government has introduced the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Bill to ensure equality and non-discrimination of people with special abilities.
In order to fulfill the obligation under United Nations Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the government proposes the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Bill 2014. India ratified the United Nations Convention in 2007. The bill seeks to achieve equality and non-discrimination for people with special abilities. It proposes to give several rights and entitlements to specially abled persons. These include disabled-friendly access to public buildings, hospitals, modes of transport, polling stations, and similar public utilities.
What has prevented people with disabilities from accessing these jobs? A lot of it is the fact that persons with disabilities are told that there are only certain kinds of jobs that they can do. So if you're a disabled person, you might have an MA, but the jobs advertised would be to operate lifts or answer phone calls and stuff. And the fact is that, and you can see this from the recent IAS topper. I mean, when she cleared the IRS, they told her that there was no job available for her because of her locomotor disability. But if you were to extend certain accommodations to her, she would be able to perform any task, now in the IAS as well. Like, I have absolutely no doubt about that.
The bill expands the definition of disabilities and adds 12 more categories to the existing 7 and makes it 19. Now persons with disabilities may include spectrum disorder, blindness, cerebral palsy, neurological mental illness as disabilities. According to the bill, persons with 40% disability and above may be entitled to get reservation in education, employment and special preference in government schemes. It seeks to increase reservations for specially abled persons in public sector jobs from existing 3% to 5% and reserve seats for them in higher educational institutions. The bill mandates all educational institutions to be inclusive and provide adequate disabled-friendly accommodation. It proposes to empower the National Disability Commission to make and enforce policies. Any person who violates the provisions of the bill may be punished with imprisonment up to 6 months and a fine of Rs 10,000 or both. Any subsequent violation will be provided with an imprisonment of 2 years and fine of 50,000 rupees.
Only one disability certificate. Yes, it does have the criteria and all mentioned, this much handicapped in this field and all that, but to a bureaucratic official who does not know the intricacies, in fact even the doctors don't know mostly, he just says disabled, yes or no. Yes, okay, you fall in this quota. In falling in that quota, the whole cake is eaten away by people with locomotor disabilities, blind, deaf and dumb.
The bill proposes to set up a national fund to provide financial support to specially abled persons. It empowers the state governments to establish special courts in each district to try offences. These courts may be set up in consultation with the Chief Justice of relevant high courts. The central government may constitute a national commission for specially abled persons. The Commission will inquire into matters relating to deprivation of rights and safeguards available to disabled persons and recommend appropriate remedial measures. The bill was initially introduced by UPA government, and after coming to power, even Modi government is in full agreement with the provisions of the bill. Many believe their challenge lies in the implementation of the bill when government goes out to build infrastructure facilities in educational institutions and government offices. The bill's financial memorandum is silent on expenditure that is going to incur once the government starts implementing the bill. With camera person Raj Thakur, Raj Kamal Rao, Rajya Sabha TV.
It is proper for the centre to impose widespread legal obligations on the state governments and municipalities with regard to specially abled persons, which is a state list subject. Some of the obligations covered by the bill are providing free education till 18 years of age, barrier-free access to all parts of utility infrastructure, ensuring that all existing public buildings are made accessible within 5 years, all public documents are in accessible format, and retrofitting of vehicles and accessibility of bus stops, railway stations and airports for specially abled persons. Ma'am, tall call in 5 years. Will it be possible? Not possible for the state governments to implement?
Our main problem with disabilities was that disabilities was always a closet problem, and not many people were willing to come forward. But now I find a sea change in the attitudes of people, society and state governments. Already about 8 state governments have a state policy. 7 were in the process of incorporating a state policy. So disability is coming more and more into the forefront. And if state governments want, they will do it. And a lot of them have already proactively taken up the disability agenda. And they are working towards having a state inclusive society mainstreaming disabled people. So I am feeling very positive about it. We need to get the bill across because disabled people have been waiting.
No doubt, ma'am. They need the legal framework. The problem is on the implementation side. Will the states eventually, they will have to request for funds from the center to implement this. Schemes will have to be formulated, and then the entire thing will have to pan out that way. All I'm saying is, do you think the leadership in the state is matured enough to accept disability and the work that needs to go into providing for infrastructure for specially able people now?
Definitely. Definitely, a lot of states have shown a lot of proactiveness in incorporating the disability agenda and making life easier for disabled people, even without this, under the old PWD Act, and they have gone far ahead. What we need to do is basically to sensitize people, because you see, my problem as secretary of this department was in putting across this information that when you're talking about disabled people, it's not a homogeneous group. It is a very heterogeneous group. There is a lot of diversity, which people found very difficult to understand, because visible disabilities are there, and then there are the non-visible disabilities. You know, visible disabilities, I would say the blind people with visual impairment, the orthopedically disabled people, the hearing disabled people. But then the intellectual disabled people, they are the ones that were the category more difficult to deal with, and that is a category that needs more state support. The parents need more help, and generally they are closeted in the household.
You would like to add to that on the implementation and the bandwidth available with the state governments to take on a huge challenge of providing the infrastructure for specially abled people within a time frame of 5 years?
You see, I think coming from where about my thinking, I don't think that should be a question of cause for concern, because it's expected of the state governments. They are also, government supposed to provide services. It's expected of them to do the minimum that the Act is actually asking for. So I don't think that should be a problem. It is, the onus is on them as much as central government to provide for all the services. The parameters that they want what the central government is saying should be a minimal one, and that should be giving them a kind of how do I say it? That's the bottom line. They should enhance the services, and it's unfortunate that we have to think whether state governments can do it or not. The question should be that how do we help them do it in terms of I'm not talking in terms of resources, in terms of providing technical support. to the state governments? I think that would be a better question. Some states may be equipped to do certain things better than some other states. I think the center should facilitate that process. So we should not consider it a burden on the state government. If that is a minimum, disabled people are also our people. So it's high time these rights are realized at every level, including the state governments. And so I think, I agree with ma'am that, it is something that state governments are now looking at disability in a much more progressive manner. That's very welcome. And I hope these attitudinal changes which she's experiencing reflects an actual service delivery to the disabled.
Ma'am, on the point of timeline, just specifically on timeline, 5 years and no medium or pathway or highway being created to deliver funds to the state and no talk of that. Do you see it really happening in 5 years?
Yes, I see it happening in 5 years because one, the standing committee has recommended specific timelines should be put in. Secondly, we are talking of, again, the standing committee has made a very valuable suggestion of having a disability budgeting, like the gender budgeting. Now, if we could do it for women, if we can do it for other vulnerable groups, why not? They are part of society, as she says. 3% of our people. We don't talk in terms of budget for normal people. So why should we talk in terms of budget for disabled? It's just a question of putting in those guidelines, ensuring that they are implemented. And people have disability in their homes. They just don't know how to deal with it.
Correct. On the legal framework side, do you see any issues with the bill as it is now?
Yes, I think the bill, that is the biggest problem in the bill. The bill reads very well. It's a very interesting and interesting reading. It has nice definitions. It has multiple bodies created. It has all kinds of aspirations. Unfortunately, these are not remedies which can be easily enforced in any court of law. I, as a person who's a practitioner in court, would have liked the act to have that this is what the state is entitled to give. State is liable to give you. Should this not be given or should this not be provided for, this is the place you go for implementation. So there is a complete mismatch there. I don't have a space to go to. And certain things are very generic. It kind of is like, it's more like the state shall strive to do the following things, which is nice reading, but state shall strive to do the following things how? In what capacity? In what manner? What is the extent of my expectation as a disabled person from this bill and from the state? There is some kind of a lack of clarity in that. Because what I think is the right parameter may not be the next person thinking on the state parameter. The state may think completely differently. The court, meaning basically constitutional court, will go to the High Court or Supreme Court because there is no other court here. That the disabled court that's created here, it is not clear whether it's for this purpose or some other purpose. I'll come to that in a moment if we have time. So when we go to the High Court or Supreme Court, it will appear as if what the disabled are seeking is highly impractical and the government is not equipped to do those things. So this is, law doesn't come every day. This has taken, I think, almost 20 years to be revisited and looked at. People have worked on it, and how do I say? I think the intention of the government is extremely progressive, and they're well-meaning. So the opportunity here that is given here should be made use of to ensure that the bill that we have today, when it translates into an act, will be something that doesn't need revisiting for another 20 years. So that perspective is lacking. So, we have the experience of how the previous PWD Act worked.
So what you're actually saying is that the bill actually gives you a feel that we are in evolution stage, and we are not in a stage where we have found that benchmark and we are creating a system for coming 20 years.
No, I don't know. I'm not saying it's evolution. I'm saying, no, the bill actually reflects that we have realized a lot of things. It reflects that we are no longer in evolution stage. But having realized that this is what is needed, how do we get that out from that is lacking in the bill? See, a statute is not a intention of good objectives.
Correct.
The Constitution of India gives us adequate protection for that. So we don't need to reiterate that in a statute. A statute should be about justice delivery. It should be about service provision. That is lacking. For example, if I have a severely mentally retarded person today who needs special services, where do I get that from? Can I go to a court and make an application today that declare me so-and-so and then give me these services, and this service is available in this place? That is lacking. I would say in terms of This is something which I'm sure ma'am will agree, a lot of us see that severely mentally retarded children and women and people actually do not get any adequate spaces for them to live, and they are not adequate service providers, caregivers. There's a huge lack, there's a huge, we lack those caregivers.
Correct.
Now, if I want a caregiver as a disabled person, this bill says that government will provide, but how will the government provide?
That
Have we
is
created, there is some mismatch in terms of actually availability of services, and I hope that will be corrected.
I'll take more in the next half, ma'am. Time for us to head into a break. When we come back, we will talk about the recommendations of the Parliamentary Standing Committee. Welcome back. The Parliamentary Standing Committee on Social Justice recommends to the government to make it mandatory for private institutions to provide reservation for specially abled. The committee wants the government to amend the bill to include kidney failure, blood cancer, and acute diabetes as disabilities.
The Parliamentary Standing Committee on Social Justice in its report on the bill has said that difficulties faced by persons with special abilities to earn livelihood are more compared to normal persons. The parliamentary panel recommends basic social security such as food, clothing, shelter and healthcare to specially abled persons free of cost. The committee recommends including transgender persons within the ambit of the bill. The committee records that attitude and psychology of people are a major hindrance to full and effective implementation of the bill. The committee has recommended to include attitude and psychology in the definition of social barrier mentioned in the bill.
Recently, the United Nations actually taken out a general comment on Article 6, which is on women and children with disabilities, which talks about the need to sort of consider the fact that women and children with disabilities have multiple layers of discrimination. It's gender and disability. So you need to give it special treatment. And that's something that was removed from the final draft that was the final bill that was introduced in Parliament. The chapter was reduced to half a section. And now the Standing Committee has asked for it to be recognized and incorporated once again.
According to the Standing Committee's report, government should include kidney failures, blood cancer and diabetes type 1 as disabilities. It also recommends including dwarfism as disability. The committee recommends that definition of discrimination be spelled out. The parliamentary panel recommends inclusion of private bodies within the definition of institution. It believes that this may help people with disabilities to apply jobs in government services that have been outsourced to private entities. The committee feels the time period of 5 years provided to build disabled-friendly infrastructure is sufficient in context of small infrastructure buildings but may be less for larger infrastructures. It observes that state governments may have to allocate extra funds to build large infrastructures. The committee recommends increasing the upper age limit of free education to 21 years for specially abled children.
Government can have a law that you help 2% of your job profile by giving it to the disabled. But as the owner of the firm, I am scared. Because I am a layperson, I am put it that way. I am a layperson, I am scared that if I employ a disabled person and something happens, I will be liable to crores in damage. Why bother? Put somebody with a little twisted leg, he said, see, he's got a disability certificate, twisted leg, disabled, I have employed him. I don't go to the people who really need the help.
The Standing Committee on Social Justice and Empowerment, headed by Ramesh Bias, submitted its report on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Bill 2014 on 7th May 2015. The bill was introduced in Rajya Sabha by UPA government and was referred to the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Social Justice and Empowerment for examination. The Parliamentary Standing Committee has asked the government to implement and pass the bill as quickly as possible so that specially abled persons can avail their benefits soon after the passage of the bill. With camera person Raj Thakur, Raj Kamal Rao, Rajya Sabha TV.
The bill mandates governments to provide various facilities and services to specially abled persons that has financial implications. The financial memorandum of the bill does not provide any estimate of the financial resources required to meet obligations under the bill. I'll get you in, Aparna, on this. See, two things that the Standing Committee has said. Social barriers, mindset, and define discrimination. Okay? How important is this?
See, definitions being very inclusive and exhaustive is extremely important. It's important because it's easier then when you go to a court of law, things are more clear. Because
Enforceable.
It's easily enforceable. So it's important to look at, have it then that way. The second aspect, which is why I think that there's a reason to have a larger definition, is that the perspective that we have, especially when it comes to social barriers and when it comes to discrimination, the norms of discrimination and social barriers that's an evolving thing. So if you make it very limited, what is significant today may become insignificant tomorrow and something new may come up. So it's important to have these parameters also in a bill. You know, as I said earlier, Act doesn't get changed every day. You know, it takes a long time for people to reach across the government and get them to change the Act. So given that, and we all know that. So but considering we know that, it's better to factor in on a long term with some kind of vision. About 20 years from now, these are something that we need to make sure that it is achieved and to keep that in. So it's important to have these very clear definitions.
Ma'am, do you think it's just merely a start, but the vision is missing?
No, the vision is very much there. When this draft was submitted to the Parliament, we had the UNCRPD in mind. India is a signatory to UNCRPD, and therefore it was an obligation on part of the country to harmonize our main legislation, which was the PWD Act 1995 with the UNCRPD. So what Aparna is saying that the bill is a little verbose. It reads like...
should be a little verbose.
It should be, because this is an enabling framework. It is a central law.
That is what she's saying.
No, it is an enabling framework. It has brought in
definition of social barriers, the social barrier that the Standing Committee is talking about, and discrimination, which means what is discrimination has to be codified and explained.
Yes.
That if this is done to a specially abled person, it amounts to discrimination. If this is done, it amounts to discrimination, so that it is more enforceable.
No, what she's saying is very right, and that is why the entire bill the draft bill was put before the Standing Committee, and they have rightly plugged in a lot of gaps which were there in the original draft, because that's the very purpose of placing something before the Standing Committee, and a lot of their recommendations are absolutely wonderful, I mean, which I am finding now that they have come out, and things which I thought should be done, and but really, you know, it may have got left out because we work under a lot of pressure, but like housing for the leprosy cured people, it is something which has been my sort of dream wish to have housing for them, because this was something I was working on. But without a legal mandate, it becomes difficult to implement. Now they have talked of insurance. Insurance again is a very important thing. Access to to social security, again, that is something very important. And I'm so happy that all these recommendations have come in, because it makes the bill a little more, I mean, makes it very much more encompassing, I would say.
So do you see the hard work put in by you actually fructifying the way you wanted it to?
Yes, I do.
That's a great consolation.
Yes.
On the point of inclusion of new entities like transgenders, kidney failure, and acute diabetes, now bringing them into the ambit of disabilities, to what extent will it serve the purpose of the entire bill? Because the disability as it is understood in the Indian context as of now is more to the specially able, the ones who have huge limitations. Now, bringing more in, do you think we are really prepared?
You see, the way I look at it, there should be an exhaustive disability definition, which is there in this Act. As long as any category fits in that definition, disability definition, they should be included in it. So the limitation that Act is prescribing, I'm not going to comment on whether transgender should be included, whether people with kidney failure should be included and all. I don't want to get into that individually, because then Tomorrow there may be a third, fourth or fifth per category which is to be included here, which is not included. So I mean, there's no end to that. Instead, a better way to do it is have a definition of disability which is very comprehensive. Any person fitting in that category should be included. For example, a person requiring dialysis, like both kidneys have failed and the person requires support, may be eligible. I'm not saying it should be included. I'm saying may be eligible to be categorized as a disabled person. Whereas a person with a moderate value may not be eligible, because then the person is not really disabled. It's only a medical condition that is there. So that distinction has to be made. Likewise, for a person suffering with leukemia, I think that's another thing that they've said. Likewise for transgender. So a disabled person is defined in a particular way. As long as a person meets those parameters, it should be included. And there was, at one point in time, I'm sure there was discussion that, HIV/AIDS, the persons living with HIV/AIDS should also be included in this. So these discussions can go on, and if you include certain kinds of people, another group may feel that we are not included in this bill. So that way it gets very difficult for any state to implement a law. The basic premise of any act is that it will serve for the objectives of certain categories of people. And today, what is not specified in that act may extend to many other, some other new category. Unfortunately, I'm not getting in my mind what could be the new category. But they should follow. There are, for example, disability includes, and it says A, B, C, D, E. If they fulfill all those conditions, that person should be considered disabled and should be eligible for benefits of this act. That's how I would look at the act.
Okay. Moving on, my colleague Rajkamal Rao spoke to Dr. Shubhra Mukherjee, specialist doctor for specially abled persons.
First, most important thing, our transport system, our roads, our everything, and the institution, our hospital, if we can't change those infrastructures about, friendly, so how can those people will communicate or commute from one place to other place? And their life will be very difficult. Okay. It's very difficult. A person who has a come from a wealthy family, that person can afford a car or something like that. But every person is not like that, no?
Thank you, ma'am, for joining us on this discussion. It's time for us to end the show. You can email your suggestions and comments to law.rstv@gmail.com. You can also watch our shows on the RSTV page of YouTube. We'll be back with a new issue and a new episode. Keep watching Raj Sabha TV.